Hello, good
Hello.
evening, everyone. Welcome to Coffee Buses and Politics and Potholes. Special theme this evening because I've just been out canvassing as one does on Sunday. And of course, number one issue is the state of the road. So I thought it would be useful for me and David to have a chat about highways in general, what's being improving or not. And what can we see this year? It's only me and David this evening. Stephen, I think, is watching the football. And Martin is not well today, so he'll probably join us next week.
Yeah.
And please do add your comments, your live comments and questions in the chat. We'll take some comments as usual and answer them live. But meanwhile, there is some good news. We had the Highways Committee at the County Council last week. This week on Tuesday. And there are a couple of things that are interesting, I think, from a public perspective. One is we discussed the highways asset strategy of, what to prioritize, what to repair and how, and a very, very long document. If anyone is interested in the detail, there's a whole asset management strategy and data strategy as well. But I think most relevant for residents, the Highways Committee approves the 2026-2027 Highways and Transport Capital Program. And there is some good news for both Huntington and St. Ives. And also, I have some thoughts on, where this goes next. So, David, what's the good news for Huntington?
Well, the good news for Huntington is quite a lot of work on the roads. So just going through, resurfacing the carriageway for Hinchingbrook Park Road, resurfacing the carriageway and clearing the vegetation and the ditch on Hertford Road, then Sapley Road, but not as far up as I live, is also being resurfaced. Then there's more surface treatments. So around Desborough Road, a few places there, as well as Conniegear Road, Mayfield Road, which are quite quite busy roads, relatively speaking. And then there's preparation for micro asphalt on quite a lot of roads. American Lane is the big one because that's in a really rough way at the moment. But there are a few, and then there's actually some in St. Ives as well. So looking at St. Ives Needingworth Road, which, my word, that needs doing, and it's resurfaced carriageway throughout. So yeah, so I think that was you, I think, to a large extent, Alex.
Just me and many residents complaining. So, I wish to thank everyone, especially those of you living on Needingworth Road, who got in touch and who also reported the condition of the roads to highways. I think, obviously, there's always the argument saying, well, at some point it will be done. But I do think that often repairs can be sped up or can be prioritized if there is a lot of pressure from residents or councillors. It's what I experienced previously when I was in Cambridge and what I experienced now. Of course, there's an evidence-led strategy to prioritize roads. So obviously the county council knows which ones are worse and which ones need to prioritize this year. But I do think it's fair to say that the more issues are reported, the more they're on the radar, and therefore they are getting prioritized. So that's why it's really important. I encourage everyone to actually report highways faults. One of the interesting things with Needingworth Road is a lot of the times people ask, well, why can't this be fixed, or why wasn't fixed already? I was actually quite surprised how much each project gets allocated. So Needingworth Road, resurfacing the carriageway, £218,000. Sapley Road, the one that David mentioned, although he doesn't go as far as to where he lives, £300,000 allocated. So if you think about it, those are really big numbers in the context of a highways budget, the maintenance budget about 70 million. Part obviously is government funding, and part is the county council putting its own budget into maintenance. But if we look at this, it's difficult to imagine what costs so much. But of course, the cost of materials has gone up. The works are done through a contractor as well, so it's not an in-house team. Actually, a lot of those works have gone up in price. The main issue that I have with a lot of the repairs is the quality of repairs, of actually ensuring that if we're going to spend so much public money, actually the quality is high and the repairs last. And I have a lot of thoughts around, I think this can be improved in the current we have.
This is, yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, this is something I think people have sort of seen quite often. Um, is patches don't last. Now, sometimes they are temporary patches just to deal with the worst problems until the weather improves and you can do proper work. But um, there are other ones which are clearly meant to be longer lasting, which seem to fall apart very quickly. But also, you kind of think if work's being done on roads, you'd want it to last a few years, and often it doesn't seem to. And of course, this is that, lots of things cause that: lack of investment for a long time, heavier cars, more rain, that sort of thing. I do think that the county could do better on communications. So Conygear Road, for instance, has is on the list to be done, which is great because it needs doing. At least I thought it saw it on here. Yeah, Conygear Road surface treatment. So from Sapley Road to Kings Ripton Road, which is the whole length of it. They came in and they've done some initial works to patch the worst of the holes and make it level. I asked Alex before what was involved in that, but didn't tell people that's what was going on, and so people assume that it's it's shoddy work or something because they're not being told what's happening.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. I don't know. I know it's difficult getting all the information out there, but I think there must be a way. And I think just helping people understand a bit what the challenges are in maintaining roads might help. But I'm afraid that, that said, as you say, some of the works that have been done just don't seem to be of particularly good quality. They don't seem to last. Pardon me, and I don't know what the cause of that is. How much of that um, is problems with the contractor, problems with the contract, lack of supervision, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that I raised in committee is that how we inspect the works and like what kind of accountability do you have? Because basically now, obviously, you order, let's say, an emergency pothole repair, the contractor attends on site, they repair it, but most of those works are not necessarily inspected, and obviously don't have the capacity to inspect every single work that's being done.
Yeah.
So the county council at the moment, I think they sample around 5% of works. Out of those 5% of works, they actually do go back and check if it was done properly. There was a freedom of information request. I found that one resident asked about 10% of those 5% inspected actually fell below standards. So they were like, yeah, bad or shoddy works or however you want to call them. Now that's a real issue if you think about there like many tens of thousands of potholes. So if you're looking at like kind of a 10% failure rate, I think for me, obviously, if I was in administration, which I'm not, like I would really like push for actually looking at penalties in the contract or like some way to actually incentivize contractors not to actually do those kind of bad works, because otherwise if you order something and then it gets reordered because it's not good enough and you get paid again, for example, what is the incentive to do the work right in the first place? You might like rush, for example, or have limited supervision to finish more potholes to get more money. And I think it's one of the issues as well of not having in-house highway services, because obviously if the main end goal is to obviously make more, to have more orders and to make more, obviously to increase your profit as well, obviously as a company that you always will have this in your consideration, like how profitable the business is. You can have a lot of those issues unless you have a good and robust inspection regime.
And that does seem to be a problem. I mean, the thing is, we've ended up with outsourcing across a lot of areas where where for one reason or another, external providers have started providing whatever service it happens to be. I mean, the big one that seems to me really problematic is children's homes, but it's probably a different topic that we don't want to get onto. But it is, you've got to worry, you've got to wonder quite what's going on if if contracting, if the contracts aren't working so much of the time. I mean, a 10% failure rate feels really pretty high to me.
Yes, I mean, I was quite shocked to hear. I was obviously surprised to hear that, like, oh, of course, we don't have. I knew we don't have the capacity to inspect every single work, but that's like kind of in a way, the difficult thing for me of why like I'm really struggle to see what are the advantages of outsourcing everything within highways, or like most, part of it. If you like are having a contractor and you have to double check anyway and reorder stuff and like we use a lot of our internal capacity just to prevent bad works, like what's the point of having it in the first place? Like for me, like if you outsource something, you think, okay, someone actually has better skills and like more expertise to deliver the job, and you kind of like trust them to do the job better than you could. Otherwise, what's the point of actually having external providers? So I think it's like a difficult one, which is obviously discussed in the context of this year. The county
Yeah.
council, the administration actually has the chance to review the contract and to put new conditions and things like that. Obviously, that's up for um, the relevant committees and the administration and so on to look at. But it's very, very difficult to have a completely different model to deliver because a lot of those highways contracts, and most councils are outsourced, are also very long-term contracts. So you look at, like 10 years highways contract, or like the street lights, for example, I think it's like a 20 or 30-year contract. So even if you have political change in the council, it's actually very difficult to change anything meaningfully in how you deliver the services, which is quite counterintuitive because obviously, if residents vote for a certain party
Yeah.
to take control of like a council, and they promise certain things on like highways, and then in practice you can't actually deliver what you promised. It's a bit difficult because you might be stuck in a contract that you can't actually change, or there's no break clause in sight.
Yeah, and it's a. I mean, this is kind of the thing with the asylum hotels as well, and it is difficult because obviously, a longer contract can work out cheaper. You can develop that relationship, but yeah, I mean, it does seem to be one where working out how to bring it in house over time. It seems like a good idea. I mean, I don't know that bringing it all in at once would work,
Mm.
but do something to allow it to come back in sort of seems like a well, an idea whose time has come. Let's put it like that, because what we've got at the moment, frankly, isn't working.
I honestly think for like especially maintenance, I think everything can be brought in house. It's just very difficult to do the business case because it's business as usual, and because you have to prove that it is more cost effective when in a lot of cases is investing for the future. Like if you think, for example, of pothole repairs, the idea to have like someone, a contractor who's not even based in the local area, driving to a site to fill in one pothole and then driving back, and not, or like having a village with like 30 different potholes, but because only one work was ordered, you drive that village and back, only fixing one or two issues. Like I think it's a very, inefficient way to use public money, really. And obviously that's like the way the contract is constructed, kind of like raise the order and you like go and like basically you do what you were asked to do. You don't see, well, on the road next door, next to the road that you're working on, there's like more potholes. I will do those
Yeah.
whilst I'm here and save on the travel and fuel and so on. So it is really difficult. I think obviously if you had in-house, at least for the maintenance, you could plan those works a bit better. Yeah, I mean, in my view, like if you were to do like a whole, if you were to like go to like a village, it's probably easiest to do everything in that small village in the same day rather than just raising 15 different orders with 15 different times of travel. And obviously this is time where like people who are obviously on the job get paid as well, like traveling there and back, so you're kind of just duplicating the time
Is
spent.
is that is that the preventative rather than responsive or reactive thing that I've heard about? Does that mean doing more of that, or have
Yeah,
I got?
I think Yeah, I think it's fair to say like the county council, like, well, the current administration does also, it's something that we also like wanted in the previous administration, move towards a more preventative way to do potholes. The question is how much you can do within the existing framework of the contract as well.
Mhm.
Which is always the difficult thing. Yeah, but I think in general, like people are annoyed, and I am annoyed as
Mm.
well, to see works being done badly. um I have an example. Like recently, I was just like in St. Ives earlier leafleting, and Westwood Road, there were some emergency repairs. Like there's some pictures all over the Facebook group, and it's exactly that classic example of you fill in the worst,
Yeah,
deepest pothole, and next to it there are like three other ones, and it's quite obvious to anyone who perhaps doesn't know exactly how the system of ordering works. They're like, why didn't you fill all of them whilst you were there? And I
yeah.
think that that really needs to be sorted out.
And yeah, no, I agree. I mean, there was one time one recently where people asked me recently about bins, why you got two people emptying the bins, like the ones like by the path, not the wheelie bins, when one person could do it. And I asked the question, and it's basically because they're going around in pairs for other jobs, and it just makes sense for them to do that. But it's so, sometimes there are odd things that go on, but it is hard to understand why, you've come there with the stuff to do one pothole, and you haven't done the other ones while you're there. That is, yeah, that's kind of hard to understand. I think the other thing that is part of it, and this isn't so much the slightly with roads, with private roads that haven't been adopted, which can cause a lot of problems, but then also paths. So you would expect paths generally paths and pavement generally to be high, whoever does the highways. But for instance, in my ward, a lot of the paths around the Oxmoor are in really dodgy state. But you've got this crazy mix of people who are responsible for them, because it's a mixture, bizarrely, of county, district, and places for people, and a couple of other bits from when housing was taken on by or given over to what became. So it was Huntingdon Housing Partnership, then Luminous, then Chorus, now Places for People. There was one other thing I saw. There's a highways localism initiative that was discussed, where volunteers are allowed to work on the highway to do low-level maintenance tasks, including vegetation clearance and pothole repairs.
Mm.
I mean, on the one hand, okay, it means the potholes might get done more quickly. I'm a bit twitchy about people having to do that. I mean, maybe that's the best option. I'm even more twitchy about people having to stand in a live carriageway to do repairs when they're not actually, they're not actually, got the sort of appropriate ticket, or all of that.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one to try. Obviously, they're trying to pilot those approaches, but at the same time, I mean, the question I raised, like on the committee in general, because they want also to. There are some areas where there are groups of volunteers, or like at the local parish council level, or other residents associations who would be quite keen to be trained and contribute towards this project. However, some areas don't have that. So the question is whether, if you delegate some of those things that should be really done by the council in-house, in my view, but if you delegate it to volunteers for maintenance works, inevitably some areas will get more than others, because some areas have stronger volunteer networks, have people just demographics are different as well, people who might have more time or training, or being maybe people who even worked in the industry, retired, and who wants to do that. So I mean, to me, there's no I think we should prioritize the repairs depending on need, well, not necessarily whether you happen to live in an area where there's a very active residents association who want to be involved. But I think it's interesting to pilot it to see what the results are. I'm not necessarily entirely persuaded that's the way to get rid of the smaller
No,
pots.
you can end up in this perverse situation where, if you do the work yourself, you then don't get the funding. So if you sit back and do nothing, you don't get funding that you might otherwise.
Yeah, that's true as well. I mean, there's one of the initiatives in the committee as well that was discussed is to take a few more in-house roles in maintenance as well, and it's something I'm really keen to, obviously after they review it, advocate to expanding, because I think that's really needed. Also, the local government reorganization is really interesting, whether parish and town councils could have a bigger role to play, especially in things like local highways initiatives or smaller projects locally. But obviously, this has to come with the funding as well.
So the thing is,
Exactly.
that's I'm not sure with that. I mean, that is an interesting one, but I just don't. I mean, the issue there is you've got so there's so much variation
Mm,
in, you know, town, you know, any parish council can call itself a town council, and
yeah.
so there's so much variation if you think between Huntingdon, which is large, but essentially the whole parish is built up almost within the boundary, and then I don't know, you might get somewhere like, well, I think Godmanchester is again a town, you know, a bit larger and isn't all built up on. But then also you'll get somewhere like, I don't know, Ramsey 40 foot,
Mm,
which is, relatively, relatively small, just that, but is actually going to have a lot of, probably going to have quite, like, geographically a big area because it's rural, and so there's there's going to be, it's, I mean, it's interesting to look at, but I think there is an issue there with how do you, how do you make sure that, yeah, or how do you accommodate all the, the differences in the different parishes and so on. I mean, so it's an interesting one, because I mean, I think there are things that sometimes, town or parish councils are better placed to do than principal authorities. Um, but quite often it's not, it's, a big one might be, or something, and so you can say, well, we could do that, or does it make more sense to have a uniform approach, or is there some sort of commissioning system going in, and it can get sort of a bit complicated and a bit messy, but it's an interesting one to yeah.
yeah, I mean, one of the things that is really, well, I think it's shocking for everyone to hear, like, it's obviously around flood mitigation. One of the things that's really important, obviously, the maintenance of drains, gullies, and so on.
Mm,
Actually, really interesting in the paper, and I asked a question around this, and I know it's again a question of capacity and what you prioritize. But the highway drainage records are actually incomplete because historically in Cambridgeshire, this is like pre 2021. I had no idea before I joined the council in 2021 that the records have not been historically collected and recorded. So, in the last few years, there's been quite an effort to record well obvious things about where the drains are and having like a routine maintenance program. I think it's like now every couple of years, like clearing all of them, but obviously some areas, especially those areas that are more impacted by flooding and rainfall, for example, they need a bit
mm,
more frequent maintenance, and it really
yeah.
depends where it is. It really depends on so many things, on like leaves, on like whether you kind of can coordinate the works with, like, cleaning the streets and so on. Like, I've seen on many occasions how drains were emptied or, yeah, cleared, and then the leaves were put on the side, and then the leaves weren't collected, and the leaves fell back into the drain, and then again you have the same issue. So I think that's a bit, well, one of the good things I think about having only one layer of council is you won't have this kind of whole like lack of coordination between different services.
Yeah.
Because you should really, like, when you're clearing the drains, like, make sure the street is also clean and you don't have the same mud and leaves going back in the drain. And I think that's, common sense for people, but that's not how it works in practice. And often it's how, which team has capacity when, and which contractor has the capacity when. But it's something that's really, like, I think surprising for me. Like, what do you mean? Like, we don't know where all the drains are and we don't like monitor them and know how
Yeah.
often do they need clearing. It's becoming a bit better now, but again, to have a complete record, it needs more resource. And when you have very dangerous potholes, that's perhaps, you're going to prioritize the dangerous potholes over that. But that comes up like quite often.
Yeah, and it it is difficult. There's, you've got multiple you've got, the sort of what you're trying to resolve is sort of impossible because there's just too many demands and not enough money. So it then becomes like, how do you, how do you yeah, how do you manage those priorities? The thing about the data is interesting, because the other, so I was talking to a friend of mine who was a councillor up in Cumbria, um, when they unitarised. And so
Mm,
one of the challenges they faced was getting all of the different, it was basically getting different, different councils who use different computer systems, different databases, to have everything in one place. That took quite a lot of work. and everywhere is going to have, people, places are going to have different amounts of, how good their data is on what they've got, and that presents a real challenge, I think, because you'll get some places where actually you've got really really good data, and other places that you don't, and it's like, how do you get it so you've got similar quality of data everywhere, and that's potentially quite a lot of work.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work on that, and I think in the last few years, it's fair to say there's been some investments in some new technology as well to monitor the condition of the roads. But as you say, it's about inspecting, and I think
Yeah.
in some areas the lack of accountability, like when for example, just to give you an example, like Westwood Road, some repairs, like in my view and residents' views, are not up to standard. All I can do is take some photos of those issues, feedback to our local highways officer, who can then feedback to the contractor. And obviously, if it falls below standard, they will come back, as it happened on a few occasions, to do the job again. But it's a very frustrating
Mm.
process for residents, I
Yeah,
think.
I've got an issue like that, at the moment on Sycamore Drive in my area, uh, where there's a problem with the drain. Basically, is the issue. But working, it's actually taken a little while to work out exactly who's responsible for it. Turned out to be county, but it's sort of the issue is caused by a combination of leaves and blockages, and where the where's the blockage, and all of this sort of thing. It's complicated, and it is frustrating, because it should not be this hard to work out who's responsible for something. It shouldn't, but it often is. I mean, the other one like that is bus stops. At least in Huntingdonshire, the ownership of bus stops is a real mess.
Yeah, I've seen your LGR video on this one. But I mean, the other interesting thing is about the funding as well. Because often, like, a lot of comments are like, well, obviously we're paying council tax. So people say like, oh, I'm paying like road tax, although there's no such thing as road tax specifically, council tax and so on. Like, why stuff is not more money is not allocated to roads. Overall, like county council wise budget is about like 10 to 11% that actually goes on like highways and highways related
Mm.
activities. The biggest budget is, of course, adult and children's social care, and we can speak another time about. I'm really opposed to like any profit making, especially in children's services and children's homes. I think it's a big mistake to outsource those, because in some areas I think it should be in house, and it should actually could save a lot long term if we actually had brought
Mhm.
more children's homes or social care homes back. However, at the moment, the vast majority of the budget is spent on adults and children's social
Yeah.
care, and those are statutory obligations. And I think that's like the very frustrating thing, because unless there's something that is, resurfacing a footpath, for example, is not a statutory duty, like providing care for, like, a child in local authority care, or providing social care is a duty, like, or like, things around the council does around schools as well. So
Yep.
it's difficult one to explain. However, funding wise, it was really interesting to read the report. So it will cost, so the estimate, it costs around 56 million a year, no, 57 million per year, just to keep the highways network, the assets in their current condition.
Yeah.
So basically, if you want something extra to improve something, you have to invest in excess of 57 million per year, which currently the county council is overall. Part of it comes from national government, from Department for Transport grant, which actually increased a lot compared to previous years this
Mhm.
year. But again, not even that grant alone doesn't even match what is needed to keep the assets into current condition. So there's always the conversation of how much of the county council budget do you put in addition to that grant. So I think what is really positive to see the government actually increasing that grant, and kind of like stopping in a way the kind of managed decline of highways based on this grant. At the same time, like, it's also fair to say that it's not enough to actually see
Mm.
a lot of improvement, although it's welcome. So because of historic underinvestment, as you said, David, I think it's something like, based on the current road condition, about 800 million is
Yeah.
needed of investment to actually bring everything up to like a good standard, and around basically half a billion is for soil affected roads, which is 40% of the county-wide road network, which is, I think, a higher share of soil affected roads than other counties. So I think there's so many challenges in Cambridgeshire that, yeah, I think
Yeah.
historically were obviously left behind, and now it will cost a lot of money. And if anyone pretends now that we're in election mode that like whichever political party, if only they control the council or whatever, or they were in government, like £500 million would be automatically given to Cambridgeshire for soil affected roads, they probably are misleading you, because I don't think any color of government will just release that amount of funding in 1 year. So
No, and I mean, it's interesting going through the papers, just how how much there is. I mean, it's something like 4,000 miles of highway that we've got to in Cambridgeshire. I mean, that's a lot to manage, and as you say, you've got the problem that it's not a statutory duty, and that's I mean, it's I know a lot of it does come back to the historical underinvestment. There's a thing with the look. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad the government is putting that money in specifically for potholes. That's that's good. It is again though the problem of restricted funding. And now in this case, I think that is an entirely sensible thing to be spending that money on. But just as a general thing, I would rather that there weren't loads of different pots and councils were able to choose for themselves what they wanted to spend money on. But it's a sort of minor but permanent gripe of mine. Just just as a sort of general thing about how we how we fund everything.
Yeah, a lot on highways, but I think to kind of like sum up the discussion, I think the things that really need to be improving. I mean, like satisfaction with highways compared to any other services, it's been increasing a little bit. I mean, it's always said like, well, it's increased from like 21%, 28%, or something this year. It's still like less than a third of people actually being satisfied with the condition of highways. So it's definitely an area that needs significant improvement. I do think it's partly the communication, people knowing what is being done, when and why, but also it is the quality. And I think that's why the contract reform is needed, and actually thinking about putting more stuff in-house, at least in small maintenance, because I think people had enough of feeling there's no accountability if there's like a bad job being done. I will put it in this comment from Anthony here. I'm not sure if David, you're following this at anyway. From the Huntington perspective, any thoughts of the development, potential development in Cambridge, and how it impacts our area?
So I've been thinking about this in terms of local government reform, reorganisation, because you've also got a Peterborough one coming that is being talked about, and it's complicated because they might our planning system in the UK doesn't work very well, so this is a way of clearing through the planning system. It's just quite an undemocratic one, because it sort of bulldozes through a bit. I think when there was one in Peterborough previously, it worked, but I think the thing is those development corporations are going to get a lot of focus, rightly, Cambridge and Peterborough. And the worry I have is that everywhere else that isn't within those development corporations, or that is peripheral to them, isn't going to get that focus. That's the thing. I mean, I was thinking that no surprise in terms of option E and Huntingdonshire being its own unitary, but that's my main thing. I mean, I think I think it's a good idea, just because it's funny. I was listening to a video earlier this afternoon. Patrick Boyle. One of the points he was making was that in France there is no city of more than 100,000 that doesn't have its own mass transit system, tram or a metro or something. well, we've got loads of those in Britain, just because it's so bloody difficult to get anything done. So we had, okay, I don't think the Cambridge Autonomous Metro from James Palmer was a good idea, but the only way, we've had that. We had um, um, we've had the go at sorry, what's it called, congestion charging, or the zone for Cambridge and so on, and it's not been possible to get anything through. And I think I think people would accept there is a problem with infrastructure in and for Cambridge, uh, and that it's taking too long to develop. And I think there is a real problem, I think, coming in Cambridge. I mean, I think you know this firsthand, Alex, from when you used to be there. It's so expensive to live there. I mean, I mean, it's crazy. And if you could just make it a bit easier to commute in from further out without needing a private motor car, it makes it a lot. It just makes it, the city more viable.
Yes, it does. I think like the main issue is, of course, like the transport has been many controversial proposals in the past. I'd not list obviously the different proposals for more busways, like Camborne to Cambridge, for example. Again, very controversial thing in terms of the county council in the last administration. But yeah, I think I do share your view, David. Like, I think my reservation is unless we get like option E and we can have our own Huntingdonshire local plan unimpacted by others, I do think a lot of the focus will go towards Cambridge and Peterborough. I mean, we already see a lot of focus going into Peterborough in terms of government grants and funding at the moment. It's in the local government settlement as well. And obviously it's addressing some specific needs there, as well as historically, like the finances have not been very good there in the council. So I think it's kind of like setting some of the wrongs of the past right in some ways. However, I guess from a Huntingdonshire resident perspective, you look around and obviously you think, well, Peterborough is getting quite a lot of funding. Cambridge is getting like obviously to be like this whole development area.
Yep.
What are we getting part of it? Will the rural areas be left behind in this process? But what is I think what is interesting in terms of local government reorganization, I asked this in a briefing call, which is actually about this, is would the new council boundaries actually impact, because obviously this is Greater Cambridge. So to me, looking at this, Cambridge has to be with South Cambs because you have the boundaries of the Development Corporation. It is Greater Cambridge. Putting, for example, East Cambridgeshire into the mix, to me, it would make it more difficult. It was interesting, obviously, but that's what they have to say in many ways. In the briefing, they said, like, well, obviously we can work within any boundaries. There have been examples in the past where the boundaries of where the Development Corporation works in is not the same as the council. But I do think, in this case, having Cambridge and South Cambs as one unitary, like, would actually facilitate this process. So it will have to be option B or E in this case to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, those problems for Huntingdonshire also apply. Would also apply for East Cambs. That they wouldn't get the focus. Just to pick up on what Anthony's saying, there's also a good book. It's quite a short one by Christian Walmar called "Are Trams Socialist?", which is why we don't have a decent transport policy in the UK. That's worth picking up. But I'm gonna. Oops, sorry, I was trying to click on those links that you put in. I'll pick them up later. But those are useful. I mean, the thing is with trams, whether you're ever going to have a tram running all the way from Cambridge to Huntingdon, I don't know. But the tram in Manchester, obviously bigger, denser city, is pretty extensive. But then you look at Edinburgh, where I think it's just one line, and if you're on that line, it's great. But if not, it's a problem. I hear about that a lot from my boss, because he doesn't live on the line and he would like to, because it would make his life a lot easier. But it's the other thing with the development, I've just pulled it up. The powers are land acquisition and disposal, and that one of the interesting things there is assembling fragmented sites, where and that does happen surprisingly often. it's what's ended up happening on the Oxmoor. Obviously, that it's slightly different sort of scenario, but where lots of different things have happened and different bits have been sold off, it all gets very complicated. And if you get areas like that where it becomes really difficult to do anything. The other one is coordinate infrastructure with provision with providers. That's a yeah that is, I think everyone would agree that is needed. Then there's the transport one, which allows them to actually, it says here coordinate and in some circumstances deliver. So there's options there. There's things there. My concern is that you've got, let's say you've got a new unitary of Greater Cambridge, which is Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire, and then you've also got then on the same boundaries the Development Corporation, and then on top of that you've got the combined authority or the strategic mayor, all of which will have some responsibility for housing and sorry for transport. The new unitary will be the highways authority. The mayor does some of the transport stuff, and this new one does some of the transport stuff. So it's that one where I do wonder again if it would make more sense to give the powers and the money directly to the new unitary authority. I mean, I think part of it is that the authority has more powers than the council and can move more, sort of a bit more, well, to cut through a lot of the red tape. I think that's right. But it'll be interesting to see how it works. I do worry that you'll end up having the same problems we've got now, that it just takes a long time to do anything, unless it's made unambiguously clear, for instance, that strategic transport in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire falls under the mayor or falls under the Development Corporation.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, to me, it's kind of like also getting rid of a layer and replacing it with another layer. I mean, the Greater Cambridge Partnership, the GCP, is like supposed to disappear from like what is it, like 2030, but then it will be replaced by another structure. So I think I'm not sure if it simplifies it at all for residents. And as you said, like I think with transport is particularly difficult, because I think the more layers you have within transport, the more you don't get anything done because you don't agree politically as well. And it's a very realistic scenario where you have a very different political leadership in the new unitary. Obviously, the Development Corporation not being politically led to the same extent as the council,
Yeah.
but obviously having its own objectives and then a different political leadership at the strategic mayoral authority level. So I think especially on things like highways and transport becomes, as we have seen with so many projects locally in Cambridge and intervening in council decisions, like it becomes very politicized, and it's very difficult to actually progress with things that will be controversial, because anything that is big, whether it's like building a new busway or having any kind of new parking policy schemes and so on, like will be controversial. Anything to do with roads and cars is controversial, and I think it is important to have one layer if possible, because otherwise you won't progress anything, because you won't agree with it.
Yeah, and that is a worry. I mean, I suppose the argument is that you have that coming in to get a lot of the sort of infrastructure sorted quickly, and then that can be handed over to the new council in some way. But the new council, I mean, what you want, like, what role will it have while it's a shadow authority? I think there's potentially good, but I the more I think about it, actually, the more issues I can see with it, to be perfectly frank.
Well, on that note, the consultation on local government organization, just your regular reminder, it is still open until the 26th of March. So do support your preferred option. Did you change your mind, David? Have you completed it, or are you still supporting option E?
No, I am supporting option E. So I've spent sort of quite a lot of time looking at it recently, sort of trying to work out, exactly what I do think. Um, the just as an aside, I'm currently on. I'm actually on signed off from work, and the doctor said I should still do things that are fun. I'm not sure that this is necessarily what they had in mind, but it's my
Now,
idea of fun.
comparing the business case of the different options is very, very fun. One of the
Yeah.
things I've done a few days ago is I compared how many times each business case mentions parish councils, each of them, and yeah, option E scores the highest as well in terms of actually mentioning the impact on parish councils.
Yeah, I mean, do you know, there's a consultation out on the NPPF, and
Mm,
the draft that's been consulted on hardly mentions parish councils at all.
mm,
Um, and yeah, a sort of I think fairly clear direction of travel on that one. But no, I would still go for option E, and I do think that it is. I think that is the option that is going to work best overall. Overall for the whole area. The I think B could work as well.
mm,
Um, the the concern I have with E is that people have, entirely understandably, I think a lot of people are supporting E quite emotively,
mm.
without perhaps appreciating that it could mean things like higher taxes, which might not be as well received as if that were to happen. Um, so it's yeah, it's the I mean, sorry, just go on. The other thing is the one that still I think is difficult to work out how it's going to work on E is the Peterborough Fenland East Cambs Council, because you've got issues. I mean, to be frank, Peterborough has borrowed quite a lot of money historically and has to service that debt.
Mm.
You've got expensive roads to maintain in the Fens. Um, East Cambs is wealthier in as much as it's got Ely, but but is sort of, I don't want to call it a satellite to to Cambridge. I don't want to offend anybody, but you know what I mean. Those links are important economically, but then you've got a quite a strange shaped um, council that is sort of long and thin, which I mean, I'm just sort of looking at it, doesn't seem to me to be the ideal way to do something, just because it's harder to get from one place to one place to another. But I think it's that is more viable than not having Peterborough in there, because I think Peterborough, as Martin would definitely would say if he was here, does have potential to grow, and it does have issues to deal with, but equally the development corporation might well help it deal with those issues, and and be in a better place to move forward. I so I'm trying very hard not to be partisan here, and I don't think I'm being. See, there's been a new leader of Peterborough City Council, Dr. Shabina Kayum, um, who does seem to be, I mean, who does seem to be doing a good job of sort of getting the place working a bit more effectively. There's been quite a lot of stories that have come out recently about goings on at Peterborough City Council, which are a little bit hair raising. In fact, in my case, so hair raising that the hair has completely left my head. But they do they like I said, I hope it's not just because we're friends on Facebook and that sort of thing that I see it, but there does seem to be some sort of forward motion. You've also got the LVEP, local visitor economy partnership, coming, and so on. So there seem to be things happening which are which are moving the right way. And it does seem that there's been a number of problems there, which have prevented sort of the council working as effectively as it might. Do you think, is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's fair to say there's definitely a lot more transparency now under the new leadership, and obviously some of the things that came out, which were uncovered during, from during previous years, are
Yeah,
obviously quite shocking. But I think it is actually, very good to see someone taking responsibility over actually putting things right and saying it's not acceptable and that's not the way we
yeah,
want local politics to be. So I think, in this sense, obviously there, but at the same time there's still like challenges and obviously implications on the budget over many years in
yeah,
Peterborough. Like, it makes it incredibly financially challenging, even though in terms of local government settlement, I think it's probably like 3 times more the money that per resident than we get in Cambridgeshire, like went to Peterborough through the central government settlement, which will probably go a long way to not only balance the budget this year but also have like a good base for the future years as well, because it's a multi-year settlement. At the same time, obviously, seeing it from a Huntingdonshire perspective, if you say it is a resident, you think, okay, why does Peterborough get more than us and so on? But I think it's addressing some of the issues that have been obviously affecting the area for many
yeah.
years
I
there.
mean, and the city does have economic challenges. And social challenges. There are issues. There are real issues there that sort of justify the sort of that extra funding.
Yeah,
But equally, there are parts of, come on, Shelley. There are parts of well, just about everywhere that could use that funding. Certainly parts of Huntingdonshire, parts of Cambridge, that could also very much justify that extra funding. I mean, sorry, it was just sorry to realize the point I was going to make earlier. I think one of the issues we have is communicating to people about council tax.
mm,
That people say, "Oh, my council tax has gone up, but my services have got worse." Well, it's
mm,
because similar to what you're saying, people still call it road tax and think of it as road tax, even though that was abolished in the 30s, and it's technically a vehicle excise duty. It's just a tax because you can tax stuff, and it's a way of getting the money. But people don't see it that way, and I don't think there's the understanding of how much of council funding comes from central government, and how little scope councils have to control their own funding, really.
yeah. It is true, or to raise anything additional every time. I mean, there are a few things that can be raised locally. I mean, controversially, mayoral preset, which is very politicized topics. There are things that could be raised locally to contribute to specific transport improvements or buses or like other
Mm,
funds, but they're very limited in terms of what you're able to raise
yeah.
through local. I mean, like some areas obviously have like things like tourist tax and so on, but again, it's like very limited in terms of like the overall budget and what is needed to be done.
Yeah.
Um, on that cheerful note, any news from the town council at all before we wrap up this evening?
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of plodding along. One is I did that video that did quite well. The where I mentioned the fence in Bloomfield Park. The town council is going to replace it, and so we're I think it's going to be 10 grand to do. So that's happening, but yay, it's getting done, which is really good. Um, but it does. I think it just shows the problem we've been talking about. We're just going to do it. We're not entirely sure. Is it technically the town council's? Let's just get it fixed. But by doing that, the town council is probably taking on some liabilities, some risks, and I do understand why councils don't want to do things, because it's like, well, there's a cost, and but anyway, it's getting fixed, which is the main thing. So
That's
quite,
very positive to hear. But yeah, I think
yeah,
when you're right on the wider point, there's so many issues where, for example, you have funding from like a new development and you think, okay, we can install some bus stops, but then it'll be up for the parish councils to maintain them. So you can understand like how, yeah, so many parish and town councils are reluctant to take on assets, even if you can fund to build such assets because of the ongoing maintenance cost. And that's
do you know
really, yeah.
It's really interesting you say that, because I think this is somewhere where I think in the past I've got it wrong. Huntingdon Town Council has been offered on two occasions recently to take
Mm.
on bus stops,
Yeah.
so to take on bus shelters, and we've said no, and I've been one of the people pushing that on the basis that it's not efficient for us to maintain one or two bus shelters. That's not, we don't know what's involved and so on. But
Yeah.
that means okay, that means you don't have the bus shelter, but also there are more, but there's more developments coming in and near Huntingdon, and if nothing else, we need to have a bit more of a more think about, do we want to take on those those um, those bus shelters and so on. I mean, it is an issue that there isn't one organisation responsible for bus shelters and bus stops, and that's a problem. Working out who, well, as I found out to my cost, getting them fixed is surprisingly difficult.
Yeah.
Just finding out who's responsible for them can be really pretty hard. Um, but and so having the town council, if you could say, by the end, it would either require council, changing legislation just to say parishes are now responsible for bus stops, or something else. I don't know how it would work, but that would I think be an improvement. Like with lots of things, where if it's a particular type of service, there's only one organisation, one council that provides it. I think would be an improvement.
Yeah.
Harder, might take a while to do to make happen. But I mean, so there's I think I mentioned this is what I'm dealing with at the moment with the drains. If it's difficult for me as a sort of reasonably sort of clued in councillor, okay, town councillor, but councillor, to work out what the hell is going on somewhere. I don't know how someone who hasn't got the sort of that isn't their role, how they're meant to find out, because sometimes it's not obvious. I mean, I had this actually recently where a community interest company that wanted to do an event. Well, it's Fitness Rush wanted to do an event on the Market Square in Huntingdon, and they were trying to find out, like, who is it that we ask to do this, because they were sort of being passed from pillar to post, and somebody at county had told them, oh, it's not us. It actually is county, because it is part of the highways. Even though you wouldn't think that, and somebody at county, because presumably they'd got through to a different department, and they didn't realise that it's part of the highway, and they'd been sent back to district and so on. Fortunately, I could sort of point them in the right direction, but it's just the sort of, I happen to know what the answer was, because the town council does stuff on the Market Square, and that's I do think that's a problem. The sort of opacity of the system generally is a problem.
Yeah, man, I think it is also the fact that, like, in so many circumstances you don't get signposted. So for example, you might contact, let's say, on a parking issue, and the parking team might rightly say, okay, there's no WLO there, we can't enforce this. If you want to enforce, it is the responsibility of the police for obstructive
Yeah,
parking or whatever. But then that team, that's where the communication ends, because it's their job. It's not their job to then maybe get in touch with the neighborhood police team to say there's an issue in this area for their record. It's still like comes back to the resident to then contact someone else. And you can see how in that process of, you, from a resident perspective, you want to report an issue and you want to, to
yeah,
know exactly that it goes into the right place without you having to email like three different counselors, three different layers of councils, and maybe like get in touch with a specific service and then not be signposted. And I know this requires resource, because I see it from the perspective of people working in the council teams. If your job is to advise only if it's within your area, and then you can say, sorry, there's not my job, it's, let's say, the job of the police in this case. It's
Yeah.
not your job to call the police or to like fill in a form to report something in that sense either. So yeah, it is frustrating, I think, from a resident perspective, unless you have a lot of time to, to complain, as many people do. And that's how things get actually done, because you get a lot of people like raising a specific issue, which shouldn't be the case.
No, yeah, no, it shouldn't be, but so often is. And it's I mean, this, it goes back to saying earlier, this is, the concern with lots and lots of different bodies being sort of formed. And I, go back to a thing that I think, I kind of think that having regional parliaments or regional assemblies would be good. I mean, perhaps if the police come under the ambit of the mayor, that will improve that, that link in some way. But yeah, it's difficult. It is difficult.
Well, we're not getting regional government, we're getting local government reorganization.
Yeah. No, I know.
But yeah, still probably better than what we have at the moment. So yeah, don't forget to fill in the consultation on the 26th.
I mean, I think actually what you said, I think is important, because I know I've been, as I always do, been pessimistic about everything. I actually do think that the current, that I think it's suboptimal, but I think it's still an improvement.
Better, yeah.
But yes, do the consultation.
Yeah. Well, on that note, we've been like chatting for an hour mainly about potholes, so I will let everyone else enjoy the rest of their Sunday evening, and I'll actually have to stop, because I've been leaving.
I'm gonna go and feed the cats.
All right then. Well, good to see everyone here this evening, and thank you for the comments. And hopefully, with Martin and Stephen back next Sunday, we'll discuss other more controversial topics than potholes. So have a good evening, everyone, and thank you for watching.